Dear guests, my name is Wiljan van den Akker, and as the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, it's my pleasure and my honor to welcome you to this academic ceremony. This afternoon, Dr. Birgit Meyer will deliver her inaugural address going by the title Mediation and the Genesis of Presence Towards a Material Approach of Religion. As from September 1st last year, Dr. Birgit Meyer has been appointed as Professor of Religious Studies at our Faculty of Humanities at Utrecht University. Professor Meyer is a highly acclaimed scholar, not only here in the Netherlands, but as well as far abroad. She has done groundbreaking research in the field of religious studies, and recently, just to name one, she won the prestigious Anneliese Meyer Research Award from the Humboldt Stiftung. We as a faculty are very proud to have you, colleague, on board. The floor is totally yours.
Meneer de rector magnificus, collega's en vrienden, dames en heren. My appointment to the chair of religious studies occurred amid major transitions regarding the institutionalization of the study of religion at Utrecht University. This is part of a broader trend of renegotiating the space between theology and religious studies, and this trend echoes a wider process of unchurching. As numbers of students of theology decline nationwide, religion in new and unexpected guises has become both a hot item and an intriguing social, cultural, and political phenomenon. Over the past year, as part of the process of adapting to my new post, I have grappled with these complicated institutional transformations. I see them as symptoms which, when analyzed carefully, can reveal a great deal about the current state of and stakes in the study of religion in the Netherlands and the changing role and place of religion in Dutch society at large. Clearly, it would be mistaken to see the process of unchurching as being proof of the decline and eventual disappearance of religion, as is claimed by the secularization thesis that has been part of grand narratives of modernization. Instead of evaporating with increasing progress and development, religion has transformed. Across the world, processes of democratization have yielded a marked presence of religion in the public domain, as I recorded in my research in southern Ghana, where Pentecostalism is omnipresent. In Europe too, religion and debates about it appear to have again an important public domain presence. For me, these are exciting times that demand no less from us than repositioning and reforming the study of religion. And with this lecture, through which I officially accept my chair in religious studies, I would like to outline how I envision my contribution to this project. Opting for a post-secularist perspective that no longer takes secularization as the standard intrinsic to modernity, in part one, I question taken for granted modernist understandings of religion as being in principle an inward, private, and even invisible phenomenon. Backed by my historical and ethnographic research on the rise and development of Christianity in Africa, I will explain the importance of what I call frontier areas of Western outreach to rethink the study of religion from a critical distance. I do so in part two by discussing the notion of the fetish, which I take as an instance of material religion par excellence. Part three then spotlights what I regard as key aspects of a material approach to religion that revolves around mediation and the genesis of presence as indicated by my title. Finally, part four showcases the broadening of horizon entailed by a material approach that takes into account multiple media, in particular pictures. What is meant by a material approach will be developed in the course of my lecture. But I would like to stress right from the outset that my intention is not a critique of religion in the name of sheer matter, a standard Religionskritik, but rather a critique of the study of religion from within that advocates coming to terms with materiality as part of the study of religion. So these are the steps I invite you to take with me in the course of this lecture. In the written version, which will be available afterwards, these steps are outlined in detail. Here we will take some shortcuts. How has it happened that we tend to think about and analyze religion in ways that privilege the inside, concepts, ideas, beliefs, worldviews, above the outside, rituals, objects, pictures, and so on? What do my and other scholars please for a material approach to religion, trigger surprise, as religion is primarily understood to be an immaterial affair, located at some distance from the mundane material realm of the world? Why should the terms material and materiality, when used in relation to religion, have certainly for Calvinist ears such strange or even negative connotations, to the extent that material religion appears to be an oxymoron? Posing these admittedly simplistic questions, I seek to call attention to the stubborn resilience of what I call a mentalistic approach that still informs a great deal of research and thinking about religion. Many scholars who have studied the genealogy of the notion of religion agree that, despite its Latin etymology, the way in which we use this notion today originated in the aftermath of the Enlightenment. And critics of religion, including Feuerbach, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, approached religion from a mentalistic perspective, seeing it as a fictitious illusion. Within academic theology, too, a mentalistic attitude prevailed, according to which religion was framed primarily as an inward domain of religious ideas, feelings, and inner convictions. Resonating with Romanticist ideas, the essence of religion was found to be located inside people, while the outside manifestations, that is, rituals, creeds, religious institutions, were held to be secondary. This mentalistic understanding, of course, echoes the primacy attributed to the self-conscious mind in idealist philosophy and is informed by the foundational dualisms of spirit versus matter and mind versus body. The mentalistic take on religion also underpinned the rise of the new discipline of comparative religion. Colonialism and the spectacular project of Christian outreach in the second half of the 19th century facilitated the production and circulation of a huge quantity of data about other religions, so-called world religions and primitive religion, that formed the basis for systematic comparison and evolutionary approaches. Hierarchies of religious development, from fetishism and animism to monotheism, share a view of inward-centered religiosity as forming the highest level of religion. It is posited as intellectually and morally ahead of and superior to religions that still rely on outward forms. The institutionalization of comparative religion and anthropology as separate academic disciplines marked a distinction from theology, which was understood to explore the various Christian traditions from within. By contrast, comparative religion claimed a scientific approach. Current debates about the future study of religion often mobilize this distinction, featuring comparative religion as the secular counterpoint to Christian theology. However, in my view, we must not overemphasize this distinction, let alone take it as a blueprint for a future vision to simply replace theology by comparative religion. In fact, both disciplines share certain basic features in their approaches to religion, including a mentalistic bias and a textual focus. There is therefore a need to critically engage with cross-cutting genealogies of key concepts and approaches from the standpoints of all the disciplines engaging in the study of religion at large, a dazzlingly huge project that has in fact just begun. The aim, then, is not a mere deconstruction and rejection of these concepts and approaches, but an assessment in their formative role in the study of religion. This role can be well explored by scrutinizing processes of disciplinary canonization that shape, as Terje Stordalen argues, how scholars think about religion and treat their materials in a more or less taken for granted, yet nonetheless disciplined manner. The point is to grasp the specific dynamics of power that constitute and normalize the academic study of religion within historically and socially specific formations, showing how ways of studying religion reflect ways of perceiving the world at large. We need to spotlight biases, blind spots, and inadequacies in these established and perhaps all too familiar ways, enabling us to imagine new directions for our work. In my present environment, in the humanities, and with my own background in anthropology, in the anthropology of religion, I feel well positioned to contribute to making this happen. Of critical interest to me, as noted already, is the rise of a mentalistic understanding of religion. Obviously, as many authors, inspired especially by Talal Assad, have noted, this modern take on religiosity echoes liberal Protestantism, which has been identified as offering a normative and theoretical template for how religion is understood, studied, and valued. In short, the study of religion has been found haunted by a Protestant legacy and bias that needs to be deconstructed. In the long version of my lecture, I turn to Max Weber and William James, whom I take as classic thinkers and deeply influential exponents of the proverbial Protestant bias in social cultural approaches of religion. In their work, we encounter the formative lines that shape current meaning-centered, mentalistic understandings of religion in the social sciences, as the Weber quote you see here also spotlights. Much of my own work on Christianity in the frontier area of West Africa has also engaged in critiquing the Protestant legacy. From the perspective of mainstream Western academia, such frontier areas may be taken as being far away, spatially distant, culturally foreign, and marginal. However, the very idea of such a distance between us here and them there is a symptom of hierarchical power relations. The West and the rest relate to each other in a particular configuration in which the former, to put it crudely, is placed at the center and stands for the norm, while the latter features as other or backward, as pointed out by Johannes Fabian in Time and the Other. This Eurocentric configuration impinges on the power-knowledge nexus at the heart of the academic study of religion, even though scholars may not necessarily be aware of it. It is important to spotlight how seemingly universalistic claims camouflage typically Western sensibilities and understandings, as is the case with the Protestant bias. Tellingly, in her presidential address delivered at the 2011 meeting of the American Academy of Religion, the theologian Kwok Pui-lan urged scholars to assess how the cultural imaginary of empire still informs seemingly neutral core epistemologies in the study of religion. This looking back is a necessary step for moving beyond the lingering colonial discursive frame that sets apart West and rest and that also underpins mentalistic approaches. Frontier areas of Western outreach are excellent locations to yield insights into the making of the study of religion as well as of anthropology in the 19th century. They have now become central to critical engagement with the genealogies of key concepts in the making of the study of religion, as David Chidester and Peter van der Veer also argue. This line of inquiry into actual practices of knowledge production along the levels of indigenous interlocutors, missionaries, and scholars is necessary to recenter the study of religion in ways appropriate to knowledge production and teaching about religion in our ever more entangled world. Frontier areas of Western outreach were, and still are, rife with struggles and tensions about how to be and behave as a Christian. Studying them can help to crack what is taken for granted in the emic perspectives of Westerners and local populations. And I do so via the notion of the fetish. The term refers to objects that have been made by human hands and yet are held to have some life of their own. Arising in actual 15th century commercial and cultural exchanges between Africans and Westerners, the fetish is a perfect starting point for my project of sketching a material approach to religion. Like anthropologist Webb Keane, I take the fetish as a proverbial rock of offense to challenge and transcend the idea of material religion being an oxymoron. The notion of the fetish is a typical product of the power relations that structured past encounters between Africans and Westerners. Emerging in the frontier area and applied to claim difference between Africans and Europeans, The fetishism discourse was also mobilized as a script in the evangelizing projects of Protestant missions. And in the written version, I illustrate this process by discussing in some detail my own research on encounters between missionaries of the Norddeutsche Missionsgesellschaft in the Ewe in the 19th and early 20th century in what is today southern Togo and southeastern Ghana. Let me here just summarize. According to Ewe cosmology, in principle, all gods by necessity require some material vessel in order to be present and enact their power. And humans can access and partake in this power through certain religious acts. These acts began with the actual carving or molding of a figure, its subsequent animation through spitting alcohol and saliva, its regular maintenance through sacrifices and feeding, its worship through repeated incantations, body movements, and so on. Here, human action was indispensable for the gods to be present and act on people. For the missionaries, this complex texture of human engagement with the spiritual realm in a relation of mutual dependency was clear evidence of fetishism and hence a dramatic sign of superstition. How could people be so deceived as to worship a human-made sculpture, a mere piece of stone or iron? As pietist Protestants, the missionaries deeply resented the human act of making carved images of their gods, as well as all the ritual acts to render them present and serve them by food offerings, libations, and drumming, and this was found to be satanic. Clearly, linking up with a widely shared understanding of fetishism as involving an idolatric as well as irrational stance, the missionaries were captivated by the distance and logic of the fetishism discourse. According to this logic, there was a huge difference between the Ewe on the one hand and the missionary ideal of an inward-centered, anti-ritualistic religiosity and of modesty and humbleness regarding worldly matters on the other. However, as captives of the script through which they represented the others, the missionaries overlooked important aspects of their own work. The strong mentalistic emphasis on belief and inwardness as the essence of religion went along with the downplaying of a concern with health and wealth as mundane. And yet, mission posts located at the center of the newly built Christian villages told their own story about the importance of material goods as harbingers and signs of progress. Pondering the cleavage between the way in which religion, both Christian and so-called traditional religion, actually happens on the one hand, and missionary mentalistic understandings of religion on the other, I have been struck by the missionaries' proclaimed anti-material, moralizing stance. This stance felt increasingly strange to me, and much more in need of explanation than the alleged fetishism of the Ewe. And here lie the roots for my passionate plea for a material approach to religion. It prompts better research questions that ultimately question the limitations of the scholarly concepts through which we try to understand religion. Indeed, it was the early converts' criticisms of the missionary project, as well as the tangible presence of Pentecostal charismatic churches in the public domain, that alerted me to the importance of placing materiality at the center of my research. These churches challenge scholars, including myself, to come to terms with the explicit emphasis on material benefits and bodily sensations that characterizes Pentecostal charismatic religious practice. Instead of allowing moral dismissals of outward forms and materialist worldliness to slip into scholarly analysis, and instead of prioritizing semantic approaches that look through concrete manifestations so as to get at the abstract meanings behind, it is key to approach religion as a mundane, practical, and material affair, as present in and making a world. So to do so requires us to stand religion on its feet. In the framework of the so-called material turn, scholars have stressed the generative power and even agency of things and playfully recuperated notions hitherto employed for purposes of othering, such as fetishism. However, a simple reappraisal of fetishism as universal misses the point. What is at stake is a deeper critique that questions the notion of the fetish itself. Bruno Latour, one of the path-breaking thinkers in this field, places the fetish at the center of his critique of modernity. The fetish was so problematic to Westerners because it violated distinctions between human-made fabrications and God, between objects and subjects, between construction and reality. The really problematic issue, Latour states, is anti-fetishism, the prohibition on understanding how one passes from a human action that fabricates to the autonomous entities that are welcomed by that action and revealed through it. Making or fabricating something is not simply an instrumental act in which the maker is unaffected and in control. It is a generating process in which subjects and objects are mutually constituted, becoming enmeshed and indistinguishable from one another, and which also creates surplus and excess. Humans are shaped by and shape the material world in such dynamics. Latour says, we help to fabricate the beings in which we believe. From this perspective, religion is one sphere among others, and in fact a rather instructive one, which engages in fabricating a constructed and yet very real world. Taking fabrication as a starting point in the study of religion involves an exploration of religious modes of making believe, rather than simply make-believe, as a serious object of research. This allows a restoration of the balance between inward belief and outward forms, which was lost with the rise of the Protestant bias and semantic approaches at large. So I propose to place at the center of scholarly inquiries the very concrete ways through which humans fabricate a sense of the presence of something beyond. Posing concrete questions around fabrication allows us to study the genesis of a sense of extraordinary presence in the sense of anwesend in the here and now, which arises through a complex interrelation of acting and sensing humans, sets of practices, and various materials. I understand genesis here in the sense of formation, as a creative process of fabricating, of bringing about or making happen that we may very effectively observe and describe, if only we look closely enough. In sum, I hope that I have been able to convey in this part of my lecture that the fetish is an eye-opening starting point for a material approach that explores practices of fabrication as key to the genesis of a sense of spiritual presence. I would like to stress that my aim in proposing a material approach is not to reduce religion to sheer matter. For the academic study of religion, such a stance would be as useless as a theistic one. My point rather is that as practices and materials are indispensable for religion's existence in the world as a social, cultural, and political phenomenon, they need our utmost theoretical and empirical attention. Thus, far from constituting an oxymoron, the phrase material religion brings to the fore an irreducible relation. Intended as a provocative shout to signal the need for a new approach, material religion is in fact a pleonasm that will become obsolete once the study of religion has been materialized. Deconstructing the notion of religion as it emerged with the rise of the study of religion does not mean that the term itself should be abandoned. For the sake of comparison and scholarly conversation, we need a broader, albeit provisional, vocabulary that exceeds the specificities that are at the center of our inquiries. And so let me put my cards on the table. I take it that religion refers to particular authorized and transmitted sets of practices and ideas aimed at going beyond the ordinary, surpassing or transcending a limit, or gesturing towards, as Matthijs van der Pot put it poignantly, the rest of what is. As said, I oppose the reduction of the fetish or other religious items to mere human-made artifacts so as to expose religion as a fictitious illusion. And I also do not take what is held to be beyond the ordinary as self-revealing, as is claimed in various versions of the phenomenology of religion and in certain strands of Calvinist theology. I take a path that slides between these big positions, taking the everyday as the location whence a sense of getting beyond the ordinary is generated. Aimed at transcending the limit that sets apart what lies beyond, these practices are nonetheless easily accessible to researchers. And as explained in a number of my publications, like many scholars, I find it useful to think of religion as a practice of mediation, through which a distance between the immanent and what lies beyond it is posited and held to be bridged, albeit temporarily. From this angle, religion may well be analyzed as a technique of reaching out to, and by the same token, generating a sense of an other world via various kinds of media. As Robert Orsi put it evocatively, religion is the practice of making the invisible visible. Once made material, the invisible can be negotiated and bargained with. And he asks, how does this happen? And the answer is by offering multiple media for materializing the sacred. Media here are not understood in the narrow, familiar sense of modern mass media, but in the broad sense of transmitters across gaps and limits. And it is telling that Orsi, who studied everyday Catholic religiosity, appears to spotlight with great ease the role of media in Catholic practice. While Catholic theology is prepared to acknowledge acts and artifacts as incarnations that make the invisible materialize, theologies of other religious traditions, for instance Calvinist Protestantism, are more reluctant or even fiercely refuse to do so and insist on an immediate link with God. I take these theologies of immediacy as intriguing objects of my research. However, on the level of analysis, in line with Patrick Eisenlohr, I regard immediacy as not prior to, but an effect of mediation. The purpose of taking mediation as a focus for research is to explore the actual process of generating a sense of an extraordinary presence. Examples abound of items in the material world that are configured as religious media. In addition to the sculptures and pots that became abodes of the gods of the Eve, we may consider relics and icons which became pivotal to devotional practices. And another exciting example is a Nossa Senhora da Aparecida, patron saint of Brazil, whose mass-produced figurine finds its way into many household altars throughout Brazil. As João Rickley showed in his research in the context of our Hera project on the circulation of Christian imagery, pilgrims purchase such figurines at the National Sanctuary at Aparecida, attend Mass so as to charge them with divine power, and then take them home. The capacity of these figurines to operate as transmitters of divine power, which protects their owners, is demonstrated plastically in the museum in the basement. Next to votive offerings, photographs of car accidents, and amazingly, remnants of exploded pressure cookers are placed as evidence of the power of the Virgin to safeguard those devoted her to survive disasters. However, it is not only pictures and objects that can become religious media. The human body, too, may be configured as a religious medium, as is the case not only with spirit possession, but also in Pentecostal settings, in which people strive to be filled with the Holy Spirit. In addition, certain utterances, holy texts, and music may operate as religious media, through the use of which a sense of extraordinary presence is generated. The point I want to make by invoking these diverse examples is that, in principle, anything, from language to body, from book to computer, from sculpture to icon, could become a religious medium. Of course, the religious use of something as a medium is subject to processes of authorization and authentication that are often embedded in long-standing religious traditions and their specific sensational forms, a notion I developed in my previous work. Since media entail their own qualities or affordances, they prompt distinct kinds of engagement involving various senses and sensibilities. A primarily text-centered religiosity differs, for instance, from a religiosity focused on pictorial devotion, one of the big issues in the Calvinist Reformation. Further comparative study in different religious groups is needed, in particular with regard to the relation between specific sensorial profiles and the invocation of more or less intense and captivating religious experiences and emotions. Obviously, huge differences exist between, say, the rather intellectualist profile of High Church Protestantism with organ music inducing stirring but sober religious feelings, the heated calling for full bodily and sensational participation in African Pentecostalism, the triggering of olfactory registers of visitors to Hindu temples, or immersion in the rhythmic soundscape of collective recitation of the Quran. And here we reach the sphere of aesthetics, understood in the basic Aristotelian sense of aesthesis as a sensorial engagement with the world. Offering select, strong stimuli for perception, mobilizing and training particular senses so as to invoke more or less intense emotions, providing an imaginary that pulls together various sense impressions into some kind of whole and contouring particular moods. Religion is a domain of aesthetics par excellence. A compelling example is the spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola, who left his followers with a concrete manual of how to engage the senses in activating the imagination so as to make present the suffering of Christ. Other examples include the body techniques of medieval mystics, Baroque church interiors that invoke a sense of the divine, Muslim prayer practices, or though less spectacular and therefore harder to recognize, Protestant practices of Bible reading, psalm singing, religious speech, and contemplative prayer techniques. These examples have in common that in one way or the other, they entail the sharpening of a believer's sensorium and the genesis of sensibilities and emotions through authorized distinctive aesthetic practices that can be described and analyzed in detail. And these aesthetic practices are the material basis for making sense. Meaning production is not disembodied and abstract, but deeply sensorial and material, contrary to what the Protestant bias suggests. The physio-cultural body is the key to understanding how the genesis of extraordinary presence occurs. Ultimately, it is by generating immediate bodily sensations over and over again within structures of repetition that religious worlds and worlds at large are affected, invested with truth and reality. By virtue of sharing media and practices of mediation, people are drawn into religio-aesthetic formations which shape shared ideas, emotions, moods, values, practices, and a shared common sense. This is not just limited to linking people with a beyond, but also calls forth modes of conduct and an ethos of how to act in the world, as pointed out by Max Weber. The shared partaking in religious mediation sustains collective identities, as of course Durkheim also posits, within a particular material environment on the level of the household, religious space, the neighborhood, the city, and even a much larger setting. Certainly in the current era, where different religious and secular worlds rub against and interfere with each other in arenas of diversity and pluralism, it is of central importance to concentrate on the micro level of religious world-making. Tensions often evolve around material manifestations of religion, from the criticism of male children's circumcision in Germany to debates about ritual slaughter in the Netherlands, to the wearing of veils or the building of mosques, and so on. In turn, religious people may feel offended by what they perceive as a violation of their valued religious media through blasphemous acts, from the turmoil around the Mohammed cartoons to the provocative political performance of the female punk band Pussy Riot in the Orthodox Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow, to the violent protests against the film Innocence of Muslims. These events call for research that helps us understand how the feelings of being offended by outsiders' abuse of cherished religious media are grounded in embodied religious subjectivities, as well as the political potential of targeting such feelings as an intended emancipatory or simply amusing act. The point here is to understand what generates the high sensibilities and strong emotions that underpin tensions about blasphemy in the public, rather than just making judgments about its legitimacy or illegitimacy. In many respects, our current religiously plural and culturally diverse environments are extensions of the setting of historical frontier areas of Western outreach. And in the contemporary setting, I also opt for taking cleavages and tensions between members of different religions or between religious and secular positions as occasions for learning. Resisting a lazy imposition of dominant epistemologies, we should use these sites as instructive for questioning taken for granted concepts. While I would certainly not wish to encourage some kind of extreme relativism, I'm convinced that understanding what matters in our contemporary world requires a serious and critical encounter with difference. Thinking about religious media and practices of mediation is exciting, at least for me. The broad range of media available and used in religious traditions should make us ponder the privileging of text as the prime medium of religion and to rethink the dominance of text-centered analysis grounded in hermeneutics and semantics. It is important for scholars of religion to open up and take seriously in their own terms other media, such as pictures, things, sounds, scents, many others. This requires engaging with academic fields such as the study of material culture, history, visual culture, music, and media studies. Opening up to multiple media and the broader framework of mediation also raises basic questions of how to approach and describe the religious traditions or world religions that are at the center of the study of religion. What does it mean when we identify Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as religions of the book? Are there no other media, things, pictures, music involved? Traditionally, both comparative religion and theology, as well as Islamic studies and the study of other world religions, have been strongly text-centered for grounding the importance of philological expertise and hermeneutics. And this is certainly one of the strengths of the field. However, in the light of the use of multiple media and practices of religious mediation, it would be appropriate to ponder the privileging of the book medium and textual study and to open up towards alternative materials and perhaps alternative modes of scholarly presentation. This, in my view, is the productive potential offered by the material media perspective proposed in this lecture for reforming and reformulating the study of religion at large. In the long version, I spotlight the potential and implications of such opening up by turning once again to my own work as an Africanist anthropologist working with Rhoda Woods on the Sacred Heart of Jesus. This motif is endlessly recycled in versions going back to Pompeo Batoni's famous painting, many of them now mass-produced in China. Here I would just like to note that through long-standing aesthetic practices of use, the picture is taken as a medium that generates the spiritual presence of Jesus through a mutual gaze of seeing and being seen. So to invoke David Morgan, it is through specific acts of looking that people engage with the picture and eventually experience it as a powerful presence. I regard it as a serious omission that so far, with very few exceptions, the study of the spread of Christianity has mainly concentrated on the level of text and meanings, asking how Christianity has been synthesized with Christian cultures on the level of ideas. Research on Christian pictorial practices needs to be further developed by engaging with the larger field of visual culture. The current reappraisal of animism, fetishism, magic, and enchantment in the study of visual culture signals a reprise of themes that have long-standing roots in the study of religion, even though this may be ill-recognized by scholars on both sides. I see a task for scholars of religion to discern and explain the religious roots of resilient attitudes towards pictures, objects, and other material forms, as pointed out by Elisabeth Castelli and Annemarie Korte. As the German Bildwissenschaftler Hans Belting puts it in his intriguing discussion of Jesus paintings, pictures have always presumed belief and still presume the necessary belief within our gaze. The truth of this statement is, albeit indirectly, confirmed by the hype-like commotion around the well-intended yet disastrous restoration of the Ecce Homo fresco in Borja, northern Spain, by an old lady. Met with disbelief, the work has quickly been renamed Ecce Mono, see the ape, and been taken as a hilarious, unintentionally blasphemous example of pop art. With regard to contemporary visual iconographies and our attitudes towards pictures, we can certainly state that at the beginning of the 21st century, it becomes increasingly difficult not only to delineate where religion stops and begins, but also to define the limits of the study of religion. With hindsight, this lecture has taken the form of a diabolo, the toy brought back from China by European missionaries towards the end of the 18th century. Starting in part 1 with a critique of genealogies that foreground a mentalistic, dematerialized understanding of religion epitomized by the Protestant bias, I introduced the notion of the frontier area of Western outreach as a site of fresh vistas and ideas. In part 2, I focused on the micro level of the notion of the fetish as it featured in my historical and ethnographic research. Instead of taking the fetish just as an ill-conceived sign of primitive religion, I proposed turning this notion around, just as one would juggle a diabolo using its thinnest center point. Seeking to make the fetish speak in another way, inspired by Latour, I propose concentrating on the dynamics of the fabrication of beings that command belief. Part 3 then stretched out again by sketching what I mean by a material approach, and this was followed up by part 4, in which I spotlighted the potential of pictorial research. If part 1 was intended to deconstruct the mentalistic approach enshrined in dominant genealogies, the aim of part 3 and 4 was to construct a material approach for the future. As my use of the simile of the diabolo suggests, the approach I suggest has a playful dimension that reflects my own pleasure in conducting research. The juggling associated with the diabolo is conducive, in my view, to a creative and critical attitude with regard to theories, methods, and epistemologies, breaking new grounds for research. Presenting why and how I envision a material approach to religion, and in so doing, perhaps even playing the role of the devil's advocate, so as to discuss which research materials and formats to accept as basic materials for our analysis, I'm using this lecture as an opportunity to trigger a transdisciplinary conversation with scholars in the study of religion and beyond. And in fact, during the conference, we have debated these kinds of issues. And of course, I'm very keen to find out later how you will respond. Religie is voor mij een boeiend onderwerp dat mij al lang voordat ik in 1979 aan de Universiteit Bremen met mijn studie religiewetenschap begon, heeft beziggehouden. Die studie was het begin van een traject dat me van Bremen naar Amsterdam leidde om antropologie te studeren bij Johannes Fabian. Na promotieonderzoek onder de bezielende leiding van de laatste en Bonno Toon van Velzen, na mijn eerste baan in het onderzoekscentrum Godsdienst en Maatschappij bij Peter van der Veer, na mijn positie als hoogleraar culturele antropologie aan de VU en tenslotte na mijn hoogleraarschap in de religiewetenschap hier aan de Universiteit Utrecht. In de loop van dat traject heb ik intense en duurzame relaties kunnen ontwikkelen met collega's hier in Nederland en in het buitenland, vooral in Berlijn, Cape Town, Londen, New York, Oslo en Toronto, en velen van hen zijn hier aanwezig. Ik beschouw onze samenwerking als een groot privilege en ben intens dankbaar voor alle steun en stimulans. Mijn bijzondere dank gaat uit naar de jonge onderzoekers, de promovendi en postdocs in de verschillende onderzoeksprojecten waarin wij gezamenlijk zijn geïnvolveerd. Ik heb onnoemelijk veel geleerd van hun frisse kijk, kritische vragen en werklust. En daarom draag ik deze oratie aan hun op. Zoals uit deze oratie blijkt, ben ik antropoloog in hart en nieren. Dat neemt niet weg dat ik er diep van doordrongen ben dat vruchtbaar en hoogwaardig religieonderzoek multidisciplinair hoort te zijn. Precies daarom beschouw ik mijn hoogleraarschap in het departement Religiewetenschap en Theologie als een boeiende uitdaging om mijn onderzoek opnieuw te positioneren. Gaande bedank ik het college van bestuur van deze universiteit en de decaan van onze faculteit, Wiljan van den Akker, voor het in mij gestelde vertrouwen. Mijn dank gaat ook uit naar mijn collega's in het departement voor hun hartelijke ontvangst. Voor mij als antropoloog, die zich in ieder geval tot nu toe vooral met het christendom in Afrika heeft beziggehouden, zijn de gesprekken met hun zeer inspirerend. Ik zie nieuw geopende vensters voor me, waardoor nieuwe vergezichten verschijnen. Al verkeert het departement helaas al jaren in een welhaast permanent transformatieproces, er is niettemin sprake van een indrukwekkende gedrevenheid voor onderzoek en onderwijs. Die inzet is het echte kapitaal waarop de universiteit teert. En daar zouden universitaire bestuurders zich wat mij betreft iets meer van bewust mogen zijn. Volgens mij zijn de medewerkers op de werkvloer de basis voor goed onderwijs en onderzoek. En ik zal mijn best doen om bij te dragen aan een uitdagende en levendige werkomgeving. Voor mij betekent dat heel praktisch het scheppen van laagdrempelige en informele contexten voor het voeren van stimulerende gesprekken rond een tafel. Ook binnen de faculteit zie ik allerlei mogelijkheden voor verdere samenwerking. Met name met collega's van filosofie, geschiedenis, mediastudies, literatuurwetenschap en het Center for the Humanities. Zoals ook wel uit mijn oratie blijkt, schep ik er veel genoegen in om allerlei circuits met elkaar te verbinden die grenzen overschrijden tussen disciplines, instituties en landen. In zekere zin zie ik mij als een soort elektricien die allerlei kabels waar energie doorheen stroomt met elkaar verbindt en die het leuk vindt als er zo nu en dan ook de vonken van afvliegen. De in mijn oratie geschetste visie op religieonderzoek heeft uiteraard implicaties voor de manier waarop ik doseer. Ook in het onderwijs ga ik voor een postsecularistische en materiële benadering van dat fascinerende fenomeen religie in al zijn facetten. Ik probeer om een veel eisende en stimulerende docenten te zijn die de studenten uitdaagt om de ook letterlijk kostbare tijd van hun studie productief te benutten. Het geven van onderwijs houdt me scherp en daarvoor ben ik de studenten dankbaar. Ten slotte bedank ik mijn familieleden en vrienden in Nederland en Duitsland die er altijd voor mij zijn, ook al heb ik veel te weinig tijd om samen leuke dingen met hen te doen. Mijn man, Jojada Verrips, bedank ik uit het diepste van mijn hart voor zijn inspirerende aanwezigheid, zijn vlijmscherpe, edoch altijd opbouwende kritiek op mijn werk en zijn praktische steun. En de frisse, soms absurdistische kijk op de wereld van onze zoon Sibren bepaalt mij bij de betrekkelijkheid van mijn bezigheden en daar ben ik heel blij om. Thuis is de warme bron van mijn bestaan. Ik heb gezegd.